names on this call from having done the Bluebook survey with you myself. So firstly, a very big thank you to those of you who helped us with the research phase. Obviously, we're extremely grateful. There would be no Bluebook without you. So thank you for giving up your time. Lots of the conversations, of course, came from various homes and kitchen tables and balconies if you were doing the survey with us after March. And so we appreciate even more the time given up in what was a tricky time. So we'll begin today by hearing from Chris Horsley, our strategy exec, who will explain in more detail what the Bluebook actually is, for those of you that it's a new concept to, and how we hope the research gathered can help you and your organisations. Chris is a first-class maths graduate and a self-confessed data nerd, who I trust will have picked out some key trends that our panel of experts will be able to discuss. We're joined today by four superb panellists. The first is Fiona Chazur. I practiced saying her surname. I hope I got that right, Fiona. Fiona is the Group HR Manager for the leading and fast-growing drinks brand Fever-Tree, who I'm sure lots of you are familiar with from the sunny days of lockdown. She holds a BA and MSc in HR and has worked in a variety of industries, from multinational engineering firms to very modern, smaller co-working startup setups. At present, Fiona is responsible for overseeing all stages of the Fever-Tree employee life cycle, and she works across 7 different countries globally, and she's had some very positive experiences of recruiting and onboarding throughout lockdown. We're also lucky enough to be joined by Simon Masters, Director of People and Talent at Shield Pay. Simon has 20 years experience within recruitment and resourcing and has worked predominantly for global finance companies. Over the last 10 years, he's made the move into fintech, and he currently works for Shield Pay, who, as he's just explained to us, are an innovative startup that provides secure online payments, both for individuals and for bigger businesses. Simon has always looked to the future for the talent that he works for, and also sits on a non-exec board for a committee dedicated to increasing diversity in the investment management sector. We are also very lucky to be welcoming back Dr. Margaret Heffernan, who is a hugely well-received speaker at our International Women's Day event. Margaret's the author of 6 books, and her 3rd book, Willful Blindness, Why We Ignore the Obvious at Our Peril, which is a fantastic title, was named one of the most important books of the decade by the Financial Times. Her TED Talks have been seen by over 12 million people, and her most recent book, Uncharted: How to Map the Future, which came out this year, has quickly become a bestseller. She's also a professor of practice at the University of Bath, and mentors a number of CEOs and very senior execs of major global organisations. She holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Bath and continues to write for the Financial Times and the Huffington Post. And finally, we're joined by our own group CEO and co-founder, John Mortimer. John has over 44 years experience in the recruitment and employment industry, having co-founded Angela Mortimer in 1976. And interestingly, the mission statement of the company hasn't changed since the day it was founded. John has seen and survived several business cycles and recessions, and is a firm believer that as an organisation, you are only as strong as the people you employ. And this is the 15th edition of the Bluebook that the group have published. So a very, very warm welcome to all of you. We feel very lucky to have you all with us today. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. We are recording this, so if everyone could keep microphones and cameras off, that would be great. And I must also pre-warn panellists that I will be a strict timekeeper. So please don't be offended if I cut you off. We will absolutely come back to you if we can. Also, thank you to those who've already submitted questions for the panel. There are some great ones already, and we will certainly try and take as many at the end as we can. And we'd encourage you to use the chat function throughout this, so that if there's anything pressing that you want to make sure gets asked, we will totally do our best to accommodate it. We'll send out the presentation to everyone, and you can absolutely speak to individual consultants if you want to go through that in more detail. Chris, thank you for that. And over to the panellists, first of all, can I just come to you for some initial thoughts and comments? Fiona, can I start with you? Was there anything in there that you were particularly surprised at?
I think what I really like about this is the fact that you can see evidently that 70% of people still believe in a positive working environment. Yes, we're moving into home working. Yes, agile working still is something that's on the topics, on the cards. But as much as flexible working exists, not many people are just asking for a home office. And that highlights to me that people still want interactions, that people still want to go into the offices. Not to the extent before, but still that is still something that people are interested in no matter what.
Absolutely. Margaret, I could see you nodding there. You're just on mute, just so you know, but I'm guessing from your nod that you agreed with some of what Viola said.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, that the mistake people make in this discussion is to think it's either all one thing or all the other. We seem to love these kind of binary oversimplifications of reality. I think, the great thing that's happened is that, and I never really understood this, but the bosses who used to think that working from home was a euphemism for skiving off have been proved wrong. And it's about time, and I don't know where this cynicism and lack of trust came from, but I really hope that they put that kind of suspicion to bed forever. We've seen actually productivity in working from home go up. But I think, as we look forward, I think, I hear multiple narratives, not just two. People miss their colleagues. I had a CEO tell me the other day that she even missed the people she didn't like. And actually, I think, as well as being funny, I think it's quite a profound insight that we get a lot of our sense of identity, not just from the people that we feel close to, but the people we often feel in opposition to. So actually, the complex social network that is a company holds a terrific opportunity for knowledge, innovation, and so on. So I think we will see all sorts of different companies with different cultures manage this issue in very different ways. I think the crucial thing for managers is not to make assumptions about the experience that people have had working from home. The people who've had to do homeschooling and who've had their partners at home also trying to work from home, and I've done Zoom calls with people under staircases, in cupboards, outside because there was nowhere else to go. There is no one experience, and the organizations that do well will listen hard to the experience that their people have had and use that as the basis from which to evolve the right kind of working for their people, their business, and their culture.
Absolutely. I think it's certainly a moment for empathy. And Simon, can I just come to you then for some initial comments?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think, first of all, it was nice to see a lot of the trends really underpin some of the stuff that we've been seeing and hearing internally. So that was nice to see that, especially around about the engagement. We've certainly seen a consistent level of engagement through this. It hasn't increased, hasn't really decreased. We've had to work a little bit harder to get that, but it's very interesting to see that the wider market is saying that. I think one thing that was a little bit disappointing to see was that 20% of workers on furlough having not heard from their employers. I think this is a time at which the way in which employers engage with their employees is really put under the microscope, and that is really case in point. And I part of me wants to say it's a bit unforgivable, really. It's a fairly easy thing to do, to keep in regular contact. You're not asking them to do any work, you're not asking them to do anything productive, but to not speak to 1 in 5 people, I don't think that's good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, some initial thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think that I'm going to follow Margaret down the line here. I think that one of the things I did with all of my guys. Oh, and by the way, talking in terms of how hard this whole thing has been, all my kids who are on their first jobs in London, sitting in their horrible bed sits all through this period, and still trying to keep in touch with me and everything that's going on inside the company. Thank you very much, kids. I really love you. I think you're great, and I think you've had a really hard time. I know some of you went home, but you guys are really good. The thing that's disappointed me, actually, and I've had some really positive stuff from my own people, but one of the things was when I asked them for ideas about what we would keep and what we would not keep when we went back, it was overladen with this concept of the new normal. Now, guys, run away from that concept. It's not going to happen. There is no new normal. What is going to happen is the new diversity. And the new diversity means, and Margaret, you're quite right, there's no binary situation here. The new diversity means stop following trends like herds and thinking that one thing, you know, Gen Y is one thing, Gen Z is another thing, millennials are something else, and so on and so forth. It's all complete and utter rubbish. Now, what that means is, this means two things very, very importantly. One, the skills of recruitment. Chris's presentation was fantastic. The thing that I disagree with you, Chris, is that employers are not, people are not going to be able to refine their recruitment skills and techniques in order to handle the kind of diversity that I think we are going to be looking at. And I think that it's going to get more and more skilled. And frankly, guys, that's where I'm going to be. So I'm very happy about that particular one.
Number two, John, if I may.
I've got one more. I'm really sorry. The thing that everybody needs to understand is that the value of what you have to offer is what you're actually doing and where it's going to go. So you've got to come right back to the value of your company, the contribution of your company, and the contribution of your job inside the company, and none of that flowery. I can't understand what a dark horse has to do with a bank, but you've got to get away from all that flowery rubbish and back into what the values, the real values are inside your company, and you will be able to hire quality people.
Absolutely. Some very strong opening statements from our panel, which I really enjoy. So one of the big discussions undoubtedly that's been sped up by COVID is the conversation around office space and working from home. And our panelists have touched on it already. Simon, I want to start with you. Is an office space necessary? And if so, what's its purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does have a role to play. I think that office space landscape, if you like, is changing and is going to continue to change. I think we've seen in the press over the last week a lot of the big, or a number of the big financial institutions which have stated they're reviewing their policy and their approach to office space. While in itself can mean nothing, I think it actually does, in the sense that they are market influencers. And whether it's rates they pay or people they employ or approaches they take, they will influence the market. I'm not saying everyone will follow, but they will influence. And I think that in itself has an impact. We as a firm, if I talk about us for a second,
yeah.
Our office lease came up for renewal in June. And we chose not to extend. We looked at the way in which we were using our office space historically. We had that traditional space where you've got 30% for growth, and then we looked at our usage, and it was much lower than our actual desk space allocation. And we realized that that's quite an expensive approach to take for something that isn't needed. So we flipped that on its head. We've gone to a smaller, more flexible working space. The number of desks is lower than the number of people that we actually have expected to come into the office, but we will work on a plan to make that work when we've got our return to office plan in place and scheduled. But I think it has a place to play in building relationships, in working collaboratively. I think we've all experienced a different way of working through Zoom and Teams and whatever utility we're using. And I think we've got used to it over time. I don't think everyone had it right, first off. I'd probably be case in point on that. We've all got a lot more comfortable with our cameras and stop saying, you know, can you hear me? And finding it very odd that you wave at the end of a meeting now. But I think we've got a little bit better at it. And I think we will continue to do so. And I think the way in which we're working, we've seen almost 3 to 4 years of development condensed into 3 to 4 months. And I think that, okay, so it's needed to be done, but actually going back to where we were isn't necessarily going to happen. And therefore, I think this office space conundrum is still something that will rumble on for a while. I think it is needed. I personally want to go back to the office, but I don't feel I need to or want to go back for 5 whole days that perhaps I was today. And I think I can probably find somewhere now that is a little bit more sensible in the middle. And I think in doing that, I'm sorry, I'm sort of rambling off on slight tangents, but I think in doing that, employers have to make sure that they are looking after their people. I know that we touched on this before this call, but helping the employees to create that delineation between work and home, because now I'm right here, I'm living in the office effectively, which is not a healthy place to be, I think, you know, every day, all day. But as employees, you have a responsibility to help people to do that. To whether it's to find the right chair that it you know, helps them ergonomically, or the right PC, the connection, the Wi-Fi, whatever it might be. There's more thought that has to go into this than just we don't need office space.
Yeah,
and I think it's a real tough one.
Absolutely. And Fiona, I just want to come to you because I've worked with you directly and know just how beautiful your office space is, and that it plays quite a big part in your recruitment and onboarding process. And I wanted to ask your opinion on whether or not you guys are still clinging on to that, or whether that's something that you can see becoming less important.
That's actually a great question. And I think what's happened is, I think, Simon, I agree with you absolutely. It isn't a clear-cut situation here, and we have to always listen to what our people want, and that's coming from a people head here. So a great example is, I would say, before COVID-19, the classic three we're looking for is productivity, efficiency, and team culture. And as we've gone through Corona, we're looking at each business, us at Fevertree itself, and we've recognized that, yes, we're an FMCG. We've been quite busy, thanks to people stockpiling. So thank you guys. And therefore, we have had absolute busy times. And what that means is we have proven as a team that we can hit the productivity, we can hit the efficiency, but now it's all about the team culture. So I think the two of them that we can put aside are definitely efficiency and productivity. But on a long-term basis, we need to now focus on our people. So small steps we've taken in the meantime. We, for example, recognized more people like to bike to work. So we've quickly put some bike racks in. We had lots of people doing that anyway, but that's like a short-term thing we've done. Also, looking back at brand, that was a perfect example, good point to raise. Brand is so important at Fevertree. All of us are very, very into our office spaces. We like to come in. Even now, we've opened the offices on the 6th. We've had a deep clean to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity. So let's not forget the people who, are homeschooling or feel that they can't get into the right headspace at home, or fear that their daughter or son will open the door at any given time, or have even got childcare in place already. So we have had a couple of people who've come in, not many, but people who've come in and said, to the team, to the people team, saying, thank you guys are open, because it gives us a kind of split between the office and home life. Thank you for allowing us to travel differently. Thank you for accommodating this so quickly. So in short, I would say, yes, it's definitely a requirement. But on the flip side, do we need offices like we used to? Probably not. So we've now rearranged our offices in the sense, as we're expanding, we're almost, we had a 5-year lease, we're 2 years into it. We were at a situation where we didn't know what to do next. So what we've now decided to do is we've had a different look at it now, post-Corona, and decided, right, brand is so important to us. People like connecting, people like coming into the office, people like, anything from, I've got friends who love the Fevertree hat at Queen's, people just love the stationery and the brand culture. So we've decided to potentially go with a bigger brand culture hub in our HQ, and then create a hot desking environment. So that allows us to move into perhaps an agile working force rather than a more of a here home working or there, office space.
Absolutely, and it comes back to things not being quite so binary as Margaret touched on. Chris talked about a bigger disconnect than we usually see between the employee and employer experience generally, but on two key issues of engagement and productivity. Margaret, I'd like to come to you for this. What do you put that disconnect down to?
Well, I think that organizations often think that productivity is easily measured. And it really isn't, and I'm astounded by the number of companies I come across that really still believe and act as if they believe that productivity is measured in hours. That if you work 10 hours, you're 10 times more productive than if you work 1. Now, we've been doing productivity experiments since 1888 in the Zeiss Lens laboratory, which showed that productivity pretty much taps out at about 40 hours a week. We've been doing them routinely ever since then, every sector, every country, you name it, all the data stays the same. And the reason it is like that is because, yes, of course, you can get people to work longer than that. And if you do it in crunch mode for a short period of time, it's probably okay. But long term, what happens if you manage people like that is they get tired. And as they get tired, they make mistakes. And then you need all the extra time to clear up the mess that they've made. And so the longer you work people, often the less productive they become. And you can see this, I mean, in Willful Blindness, I wrote about this a lot, because the truth is tiredness is implicated in virtually every single industrial accident in the world. I would argue that you could blame the banking crisis on tiredness, right? Brains that actually can't think well. And let's remember, ethical thinking is cognitively more expensive than other kinds of thinking. So sure, you can work people, you know, like demons, and especially in the environment we're now in, which is an economic crisis, they'll do it. And you can put them in terrible working environments, and the chances are they'll turn up. We've seen that in Leicester. But the truth is, if by productivity, you talk about the reliable production of high quality work, then that's not the way to go. Hours and productivity, you know, are not linearly correlated indefinitely. So we have to think instead, okay, what's the kind of work we want, and what is the context in which that's provided? If you're interested in creative, innovative work, you actually need people, to be together, because a great deal of innovation, almost all of it, in fact, comes from collaboration. You need the environment in which they're doing that to be pretty safe, and you need people to have quite a lot of freedom in how they work, in order that they have freedom in how they think. Now, you know, I spend my life kicking against the preconceptions that get in the way of this, right? Which is people think, oh, no, we need people focused on KPIs and targets, and they have to be super efficient. Let's be really clear about this. In the future, as companies depend more and more about innovation, innovation is not efficient, right? It can't be. You need 100 ideas to get the good idea. And between the good idea and the excellent execution, there's quite a lot of failure and error. Ideas do not obey hierarchy. They do not obey schedules. So you have to allow a lot of freedom and inefficiency if your business depends on innovation. So that's a very different way of thinking about productivity. And I think, you know, what all of this conversation has forced us to consider is actually how more complex than an assembly line working a great team of people really is. That just setting rules and targets and incentives, yeah, it works for training dogs. It doesn't work for the complex, imaginative, creative individuals that are human beings.
Absolutely, thank you. I've scribbled down innovation is not efficient and underlined it several times, and I'm sure there'll be lots of other people who have. John, you were smiling and nodding. Can I come to you on the same topic in a response to Margaret there?
I love the thing about training dogs, but Margaret, I'm still waiting for somebody to go to jail for the banking crisis, and I think they were awake while they were doing it too. Guys, I'm going to be very clear about this. I'm an absolute anal believer in empowerment. So for me, what I have to do is I have to get a place of connectivity in terms of what they do or what my people do in their time. And it has to be simple, understandable, and it has to be totally neutral. Otherwise, I'm in a position to disempower them with subjective judgment and so on and so forth. Now, there's a hell of a lot to talk about on that particular area, but here's just one thing that I think you all need to bear in mind on this one, and that is that with the flexibility that you are talking about, is going to come some kind of measurement, and you need to be careful what you wish for in this whole process. I think what I'd like you to do is think about, if you like, full factory employment on one pole, which is pretty horrible, and piecework on the other pole, which I also think was pretty horrible. And what you've got now is you've got a modern version, if you like, of the office, an office space. And you've got a so-called gig economy rising, and it may be that economy has changed enough to allow that to continue and work. But I think the gig economy works for a certain group of people who are a minority and definitely the top end of the skill set. So I think there's a lot out there that is, and I think Simon has it. There's a lot out there that just isn't knowable at this particular moment. And I'm looking at offices You were talking about offices a minute ago. I'm absolutely have not made up my mind about the offices yet and what the use will be. I think the first thing is that offices, if you look at the last 30 years, the design of offices is already ready for whatever changes we are now talking about. You will see that offices have become communication centers and not places where people can go and work behind closed doors and so on and so forth. So that change has already happened. What's now got, and what I'm struggling with is this. When my office is working well, it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It is absolutely stunningly beautiful. Everything is moving. It's just fantastic. When it is not working, it is the most horrible place in the world. These people are horrible. They deserve to be shot, murdered, thrown out into the street because they're all at it. And it just drives, and I think one of the rules I'm thinking of doing, guys, is that when you go back to work, you are going to have to smile all the time, because every time I see somebody not smiling, it just drains the energy out of me. And I feel that going to work means you need to be smiling in that place for the whole setup to operate.
I mean, I think that's an interesting thing here. You know, I keep thinking of the best office I ever worked in, which had magnificent social distancing, which would work perfectly right now, which is actually everybody had an office. And it had a door. And if you wanted people to drop in, you left the door open. And if you needed to concentrate, you shut the door. And it was absolutely brilliant. And it was infinitely more productive than these battery chicken farms, which are so-called open plan, which are so-called good for collaboration. They're terrible for collaboration, right? That's why people put their headphones in so they don't have to hear anybody. And they pile books and papers up either side so they don't have to see anybody. It's awful. It's just turning people into machines. And it's not surprising that that's the kind of work that they often generate. And that's why people want to work from home, because many of these huge open plan offices make people feel like widgets and treat people like widgets. And I'm afraid I feel exactly the same way about hot desking. What hot desking says to people is you're interchangeable. You know, when you're not differentiated, and if you want a desk here, you better fight for it. Get in early. It's implicitly competitive because there's a shortage of resource. And if that's your culture, fine, but let's recognize buildings speak to people. And when they say there's not enough room here for all of you, what that means is there's not enough room here for all of you. You better fight for your space. That means your colleagues are all your competitors. Good luck with it. It's a way of working. Worked great for Enron. Don't really think it honors and respects individuals.
Very, very interesting differing opinions there. Fiona, I want to come to you and talk about how you've talked about the fact you've had a very positive experience of it. How have you managed to engage and create a cohesive team when you've not seen each other?
That's actually a really, really good question. I'd like to start with the recruitment side of things and onboarding, because when we first started with, you know, the whole COVID-19 hitting us at Fevertree, the first question we had is, first of all, we've got lots and lots of strain on our supply chains, so we need to be recruiting quickly. We need to get the right people in, but most importantly is understanding that they're coming from a place of uncertainty as well. So we've currently, at present, we've recruited 22 out of the 24 people we've offered. So there's 2 more coming our way within the last 3 months. So I remember the first 5 people in particular, you know, you're starting, you know, the people team worked alongside the IT team. So it was very Black Mirror in the sense that, you know, IT got a computer, set it up, home address, they open it up and there they see my face. So it was really important to us as a company to make sure that they got the best welcome ever, so that they didn't feel kind of on the outside doing this from home for the first time. So I want to really highlight that that's a great experience that I've had, in the sense that when you are there for those guys, they actually do really, really give back, if I could say. I feel that they're more connected than perhaps in the traditional sense, because they kind of feel like, wow, this is something different. Here's someone putting in the time. Here's a team that actually do care about the changes that are going and taking place. So that's been a great experience, trying to onboard them, while scary in the beginning, doing it all electronically, but also giving them the right reassurances that, you know, this doesn't change things. We're all in this together. So I would say that was my first positive experience of kind of doing the onboarding. But there are some people on my team on this call as well. They would say as well that we've from the beginning tried to create some sort of normality to this crazy period. So Monday to Friday, Charlotte not on a Friday, but Monday to Thursday, we have a 2 p.m. call. Nothing stands in the way of that. And it just creates, even if it is a hi, bye, this has happened, we'd like to just talk. And it's given us the kind of connection that we perhaps didn't have in the office, because we all do people-facing roles that we don't necessarily sit together at 2 p.m. But it's kind of given us that normality back in these crazy times. So the 2 p.m. is definitely another one. And then we've also worked on creating as a whole global company. How can we come together during this time? And it proves very tricky, because we've got someone in Australia and someone in Canada, and we want to include them all. So we've had to, we've started some interesting quiz days. So we had at least once every month. So good old Andy had to log in at midnight, and good old Chris in Canada had to log in at noon to be part of this quiz. And it's been really great to see people putting in the initiative worldwide to come together to do a Zoom quiz night, for example. More importantly, from that, I'd also like to say that our leadership team have also put in some kind of time in the diaries every 3 weeks or so, each department, each country, to kind of give us an overview of what's happening. So from maple syrup, Canada stories, to what's going on in the 14 weeks that led to the 14th of June, where Nielsen data on the off-trade has shown almost 34% increase in our sales. Everyone is well informed, and I think the kind of feedback we had from our people is that, you know, this is fantastic that we've been able to keep communication going in such a way that probably we wouldn't have thought otherwise. Mm-hmm. So these have been the kind of ways. And also, one slightly forgets that, you know, in these times, some of us are living alone. So for myself, for example, and I think we've mentioned it in our call, we kind of brought together our interests. So traditionally we have a tennis club, we have a choir club. We've now joined or started our own book club. And it's interesting because all of a sudden there's 7 departments coming together who would never usually come together and having interesting debates about things that connect us in a way that, you know, there's been feedback to the team to say, you know, great to see you guys again. It's been crazy. We haven't been able to see you since January in the hall, in the kitchen, but now we've got book club going and we can talk about, you know, different opinions on this book. So it's been interesting to kind of go with the times.
And Fiona, one of the things you mentioned there was the visibility and the presence of leaders. And that was something that we definitely saw when we were conducting the survey, was that it had presented in a roundabout way an opportunity for leaders to be more visible and for leaders to have more contact time with members of staff that they might not otherwise spend time with. And Simon, I wanted to come to you on that. What do you think the role of leadership is at the moment? How important is leadership?
More so than ever. And I think if I can sort of expand out Fiona's answer slightly as well, there are 2 words that I've really been trying to drum into us as a senior leadership team, which is over-communicate. And I think it's something that we have to do really proactively in a number of different ways at the moment, whether it's commercial updates or personal catch-ups, whatever it might be. These are all things that I think people took for granted when physically you're in that same space and you're able to do that nod of a head or that verbal catch-up very, very lightly. And again, Fiona, I don't know if you felt this, but from a people HR perspective, I used to sometimes sort of joke that I was, you know, the head of, can I have 5 minutes, you know, when I was in the office. And I think coming away from that, what was very, very quickly a concern was those taps on the shoulder suddenly seemed to stop. And for me, that was a big alarm bell that actually, if they're not tapping me up for the same kind of questions that they have been traditionally, where are they going? What are they doing? Absolutely. And so you've got to be more proactive with it, you know, whether it's me on a personal basis, making sure that I'm touching base with as many people as I can. And we have a smaller population, so I think it's slightly easier for us to do that at the moment. But instilling in the SLT as senior managers of the business, questioning and challenging them as to how are they being proactive with their communication as well, and not taking it for granted, all the way through to the all hands or the town halls or whatever people may call them, echoing the messages. Because again, we found that we would deliver something And 2 weeks later, we would see in our pulse survey, and we have that for an engagement purpose. I can go into that later if you want. Questions around, what is this? And you think, oh, we spoke about that 2 weeks ago. And you forget that without that one-to-one interaction, some of the messages were just getting lost. And it was really important to keep over communicating some of the stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Margaret, did you have something you wanted to say on that?
Yeah, there's a really beautiful experiment that was done by Alex Pentland at MIT, where he took 2 different groups of people, and one group shared a coffee break and one didn't. And the coffee break team, as it were, turned out to be $10 million more profitable.
Wow.
Now it's a really beautiful experiment, because it's an experiment into the value of all the informal, unscheduled social communication that happens. And what's going on in that is it's people, as Simon says, kind of reminding them about things or telling them about things. It's sharing tips and information. It's, having the conversation that kicks off an idea that then I think, oh, I'll go and talk to so-and-so about it. So it's, I think what it suggests is one way of thinking about an organization is as a network, and the faster and with the least impedance that information flows, the more productive the organization is. And this kind of coming together accelerates all of that knowledge, information, and creative sharing. And we tend to think it's inefficient, right? Because it doesn't look like work, it isn't scheduled like work, and you can't measure it. But boy, oh boy, does it have an impact. And my real concern about working from home at the moment is that it's that 2-minute exchange in the hallway. There is no equivalent to that. And I think it is brilliant, the kind of virtual pubs and all this sort of, pub quizzes and stuff like that, that people have been inventing. But, I think it's not a bad substitute. I think it isn't the real deal. And the other thing I would say is I'm very struck in the many Zoom meetings I attend that what does not happen is the necessary argument. And I write a lot about, how constructive conflict is. Conflict is how you take an average idea and turn it into a great idea. But it is really hard to have a cordial argument on Zoom or any of the other platforms, because you can't catch people's eyes. You can't catch that colleague saying, all right, Margaret, you've said enough now, just shut up. And people know that, so they hold back. And I sit on a couple of boards where, all sorts of stuff is being held for when we can finally meet in, face to face, which if that never happens, is going to become a real problem. So I think there's just a lot in the stuff that you can't measure, don't catch, that looks marginal, that turns out to be central.
Yes, absolutely. And in your book, Willful Blindness, a lot of the issues that we've discussed today, a lot of the data that the Bluebook has thrown up, these were already employment trends 10 years ago. You discuss willful blindness, of course, in your book. So why do you think it sometimes takes the business community so long to respond to what we knew 10 years ago, what we were discussing 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, sometimes I teach at a business school, but I often blame business schools, right? Because they can grow out of engineering schools, and we still have a very mechanical attitude to management, as though it is really this superior assembly line or manufacturing line. I think we need to move from a mechanical concept of management to a much more organic one. It is about nurturing people. It is about the ecology and environment of a business that really turns out to be crucial to the health of the business and the health of the employees. And I think, even going into the pandemic, we knew we had a mental health crisis at work. We knew we had people who were literally dying for a paycheck. And I think we've seen that, that's been proliferated and really amplified in this period, where a lot of people are isolated, and isolation is is really bad for people. And I think we actually have a kind of precious moment right now, where my observation is business leaders are thinking much more about the health of their employees and the mental health of their employees. And they understand that this stuff really does make an impact, not just on the company's financial performance, but on how it's perceived in the world. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity to take all of the compassion and support we've seen from business leaders for their workforce and really amp that up to where it needs to be. Because, you know, as one business leader said to me recently, said, I realize actually, if you look after the people look after the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, you were nodding there. Is that true of your experience?
Yeah, very much so. And I think in terms of the way in which we try to listen to our population, we use a pulse survey. We send out sort of light, I think it's like eight questions per week we use, and it allows us to provide an anonymous platform for people to speak to us, to speak to the wider room, without fear of sort of, you know, I can't say this or I can't say that. But it also allows us to gauge our engagement as well, to understand how people are feeling, and doing it weekly. You know, we moved away from the traditional, you know, annual employee survey that basically just gauges the room over the last 6 weeks prior to the survey going out, you know, and it allows us to see a far more dynamic view of changes when they happen. And so far, we've only had it in place for about 7, 8 months now. The engagement level has followed the trends that we've seen, and, you know, from lockdown to some of the structural changes that we had to make as a result of COVID, and you know, engagement going down only very slightly, but again, you could see that impact, and it allows us to therefore say to the room that we hear what you're saying, and as an SLT we can take actions, and those actions can be transparent, and their impacts can be felt, and, you know, not just sort of, we've made a change, good luck, hope it works well for you, but we can see immediately, how does the room respond to that change? You know, whether we made some benefits changes recently, but we can instantly see the feedback coming through, how people felt around it, and it allows you to get a collective voice, because I think certainly in a smaller organization, you run the risk sometimes of, if you've got a single loud voice, it can have a greater influence than it actually is as an individual. And I think you have to be really careful of that, because that can have a big impact. This allows you to collect that information and to take the trends, take the collective voice, take the understanding. You can see things week on week happening. And I think I have to say, you know, I know there's a number of great tools out there from a Pulse perspective, but it has been a really positive thing for us to help us understand how our business is feeling and what's going on internally.
Yeah, thank you. And the data seem to show that what was a very candidate-led market is changing slightly. We saw that the number of job offers declined, had increased dramatically, and more people were accepting their first job offer. So the implication is that possibly now is a good time to recruit new talent. John, is that been true of your experience in recessions before?
I think Chris put it absolutely correctly, and that is that candidate attraction in recessions becomes easier. That if people are out looking and job offers do come in, there's a tendency to be more open to accepting things at that point. The choices become less, and so in one sense the decision becomes easier. But I'm going to have to, you know, the thing that's really important for me is to understand understand two things. First of all, actually, I think recruiting in recessions is more difficult. And I started out a long time ago, came into 1990 recession thinking, hooray, I was in good shape, I had plenty of cash. And so I started recruiting. I recruited about 50 people in that 2-year period. And every single one of them was duff. Because what had happened is that they were the ones who were let go by everybody else, and I ended up, you know, as their charity shop. So I think that good people are good people. So for me, I'm going to have to say to you that if you want to do recruitment properly, it is always candidate-led. If you start with candidate-led, you will make less mistakes. And what I see from recruiters, and particularly those who aren't particularly good at it, is the, you know, the idea that it's easier to find people when people are more vulnerable is a very dangerous thing for the recruitment industry, or people who are doing recruitment, to actually accept or to feel that helps them in any way. I think the idea of power inside a working relationship is something that I find unacceptable. Working relationships are not about power and should not be about power. They should be about contribution, net contribution from all parties into a solution. And the solution needs to be the thing that they all want over and above what their own personal agendas are. If personal agendas step into that particular zone, you're going to wreck your team process and so on and so forth. Of course, there needs to be mutual exploitation, so there has to be a deal in it, and this is something that's that I don't think works at the moment. I think it's one of the reasons why you have such a disparity between candidates' views and employers' views, and I think that employers make a decision about what they're going to do, and then they try to make that attractive, that offering attractive, which is why they tend to be suckers for trends. I think that there's got to be, the working relationship has got to be sexy for both parties. And what you're doing, it's like any joint venture. And if you look at it as a joint venture, then it becomes, you can perhaps use a different set of criteria for it. And that is, it's got to be a win-win for the candidate and for the client. And I've seen lots of times when we've had people who've loved to have joined my company, and the answer is they weren't right for the company, and it wasn't right for them. And when you're in that situation, that, you have to make that clear. So I think the answer to this is it's not easier in recessions. Absolutely be clear about it. It's not easy at any time. It's not easier in recessions. But in the end, I think that there's got to be a lot of work over the next few years in terms of both employers upscaling the sexiness of their jobs, the ambition of their jobs, the challenges inside it, and the opportunity to win, to succeed and to fail without actually worrying about the failure, as long as it doesn't go catastrophically wrong. And I think we also have to see an equivalent upscaling, and this is a really big issue, an equivalent upscaling in workers, in the employees. I think we need employees who come to work in order to achieve something. I think, and what they achieve can be highly personal, very, very diverse. I see people who have huge ambition just in wanting to do the job better than anybody else around. I see people with huge ambition who think in terms of Ferraris and flats in Eaton Place. So ambition is a totally personal thing. And it must be, and what you're looking for is you're looking to help people to find an outlet for their ambition, whatever it happens to be, and to find that outlet. Now, it's not always, not all organizations can include all people. You go back to Abraham Lincoln, not all of the people all the time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that recruitment is going to become even more individually led, even more about being able to do the thing properly, being more about being able to understand employees themselves, and then getting that match of dynamic from the employee and the company, what the company has to offer the employee.
Yeah, thank you for that. And last question from me, I'm conscious of time before we start to go to some very good questions from our audience. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on was productivity. We've already talked about the fact that it's key for businesses. It's an obsessive topic for most people. And we've talked about this being a moment that's pivotal. So how do we capitalize on this opportunity for change? Margaret, can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I think that, first of all, the companies that have been smart and led their people well and kept in communication with them and so on, I think they will find a richer social contract, if you like, between themselves and their employees. And this is therefore a great moment for listening to what they want in terms of what the future looks like. I think increasingly the notion that the future is determined by a couple of senior execs who go to a swanky hotel for a weekend and figure it all out. I think that moment is well and truly past. And so I think it's going to be an important moment for the future to think about collectively, what do we want this business to stand for, and how is it going to work? I think, one of the things we've learned in the pandemic is that some of the people that we most depend on for our lives are among some of the worst paid people in the country. I think that makes all of us feel deeply uncomfortable. And any company now has to think about not just productivity, but the lack of productivity when people are working somewhere that they feel is unjust or unfair or not contributing overall to a better society.
Yeah.
There are huge numbers, it depends which poll you read, about how people do not want to go back to normal. They do want to see change. They do want to see a proper, appropriate response to the challenges that are facing us in employment, in the economy, in climate change. And so I think there's a moment where we can really motivate people if we can show and articulate well what it is our company does that makes the world a better place. And to John's point, that can't just be about a nice logo with a black horse. It has to be real, and it can't be CSR either. It's not right. Well, we pillage 90% of the time, and then we throw picnics for orphans. We have to put some purpose at the center of our organizations. And when we do that, as we have seen from the world-leading companies that have done it, productivity increases exponentially, mental health improves exponentially. But there's an appetite for this kind of change that the companies that ignore that, I think, will find motivation declines post-pandemic, and those that can respond to it will find motivation increasing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I've got a couple of questions here that have been sent in from the audience, and they're really interesting. They're big questions, so I may have to hurry you guys if we're going to get through a few of them. The first one is, do the panel think that gender equality and global warming responsibilities will still be important for candidates in a post-COVID world? Simon, I'd like to come to you on that. And I think the angle, because I've got another very similar question here, is that some of the issues we all said were important to us pre-COVID do seem to have changed.
I think it's important to realise that what we're going through is a reshuffling of priorities in the immediate need, not a removal of some of the priorities that we had previously. I think you talk about diversity, whether it's racial or gender or any other element that you apply to it. There was a McKinsey study back in, and I've started that sentence and I can't remember the year, of large organisations that was evidence that the large organisations that had greater diversity at board level were more successful. And it was, the stats in that study, and I'm really sorry, I can't remember the year of that one, were unequivocal. And that's not going to go away. That is a stated fact. That is still where it needs to be. I think when you look at global warming, you look at the environmental impacts, again, they've not gone anywhere. I mean, it's lovely that you look at the pictures of China's environment, and the air's a lot cleaner as a result, and the rest of it. But that's not the long-term solution. That's just a short-term impact. And I think once we found, and I was just going to use the word new normal, but I feel John's going to shout at me for that one. But when we found our state of stability, the proverbial dust has settled a little bit more. They absolutely are still there, and they need to be addressed. And it's just simply a case that at the moment, firms, industries, economies have had to look at where their priorities are. Because I think if we don't get through this, we won't be able to work on the economy, on the environment. So it becomes irrelevant. So you've got to shuffle your priorities to allow you to move forward.
Absolutely. Anyone else from the panel keen to comment on that?
I mean, I would say this is a very fundamental issue of trust. That to lead well an organization or a country or a company, whatever, means that people trust you. And trust has several constituencies: benevolence, integrity, consistency, and competence. We have generally been talking about diversity for at least 30 years in terms of gender and racial and sexual equality. we have over that period of time made a pathetic amount of progress. Absolutely pathetic. When you look at the representation of women or ethnic minorities or the disabled or gender fluidity at the top of organizations, it's abysmal. So there's a crucial thing here, which is when leaders and heads of organizations say they believe in diversity and they're gung-ho in their pursuit of it, and they achieve nothing, they lose trust, which is either they didn't mean it or they don't know how to do it. And certainly the rising generation has watched this and is not content with what they see. And I think if we want to reassert trust in leadership in any kind of organization, we now have to deliver. I mean, I've spent my whole career writing about, thinking about gender diversity and equality, and I have not seen significant movements. And I'm not, I'm not a million years old, but I'm old enough to be tired and angry. And my children are young enough to be cynical and angry. And this is bad. This is bad for society, and it's bad for a workforce to go in thinking, oh yeah, these people, lip service. We have got to come to terms with this. And the same is true with climate change. The younger generation is going to bear the full brunt of our passivity over the last 30 years, where we talked about it and we did a little bit of recycling here and there and thought, oh, well, that's good enough, because actually everybody's going to forget about it. So, this is a testing moment. Crises always test organizations, systems, and leaders. And now we have to show, do we mean it, and are we competent enough to deliver?
Absolutely, thank you. And the next question is, what would you consider...
Can I just say one small thing on that one? The thing
You've
that
got 1 minute, I'm afraid.
That's all I'm going to need. The thing that really worries me about both of those subjects is that the direction of the conversations are attacking the wrong things. And that what we need is we need much more understanding of what needs to be changed, and that has to be done by conversation and investigation and so on, rather than, and I'm seeing a hell of a lot of, what's it called, staging? No, it's called headlining and all that nonsense. And I'm afraid that's very, very misleading in terms of where we need to go in order to find the answers to these things. So that's all I was going to say.
Thank you. And the final question, and Fiona, I'll come to you on this one. What would you consider to be potential opportunities or positives that companies can take away from their experience over the last few months?
I think it's back to one of the things I think Margaret said right at the beginning, touching on the fact that any company, any person that's really, truly successful is someone who can embrace change. There's no certainty about the future. There's no absolute yes or no to anything. But I think what we can learn from this is that any given time to be able to keep an open mind to adapt. So if I was to look at January right now at Fever Tree and where we are right now, I look back and I think this couldn't have been done, pardon me, I'm a people person, without the right people inside. And the reason for that is, I feel confident to say if anything was thrown at us over the last 6 months, we would have survived it. And why I have the confidence is because people have just stepped into places that is outside of their own. And that's very Fever Tree in the sense that we're in this perfect area where, we're quite big in the sense that people know us and we sell in 75 countries, but we're very much, just short of 200 people worldwide. So we try and keep into that kind of hat of trying to help everyone. No one's job, is more important than the other. We have tried to step into places. And I think what we've learned as a team is that we can overcome anything really. And in January, one of the things that was, quite brutally honest, what was being spoken about more and more from the people is that we need to hear more from the leadership in the office. We don't really necessarily see them. They're going about their days with their heads of departments in that area. But what Corona is really showing us is that the push to technology, whilst there's so many things that it can't do, rightly so, it can't give you that kitchen chat, it can't give you that hello, to, for example, the front of house team. It does allow you to kind of make those connections to potentially be able to say, hey, you know, guys, I'd love to hear what's going on in Canada. And all of a sudden, all of us, the 80% of us who sit in the UK, now know how the business goes in Canada. Or, for example, the fact that X man in, you know, X or Joe Blog in finance has these great opinions about how we can change the way we do things moving forward with the snack team or the snack office, or how we can move that around in the new, sorry, normal. It just brought together this feeling that we are actually all together, as cheesy as it sounds, and we can overcome something. And I think if I was to summarize, I think it was a great opportunity for people to look up and see, is this business going to take me further, or are they going to break? And it's that I feel like when I speak to my colleagues right now, there's this newfound love for the brand because they've stuck through, they've delivered really quickly on both sides. You know, the team have worked super hard to hit the demand of, you know, everyone around the world that's now moved from, you know, the boss to finding Fevertree at home, to be able to do that kind of break between that 6 o'clock Zoom and their afternoon with the families. So it's been really been a really busy period for Fevertree, but equally we found that we're all in this together, and it's been beautiful to see that, you know, cross-functionally, globally, that we can now reach out, and people who probably never knew who Chris was in Canada, for example, or Patrick in Hong Kong, now know him from a Zoom call, and they feel like, well, I can just ping him a message and ask him about how he's doing that instead said sales pitch, for example. So I think that's the great kind of take home that we've all had, that we feel we are quite low in headcount. We are all over the countries and all over the world, sorry, but that we can rely on each other during hard times.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. I think that's a great place to leave it. I wish you could hear the round of applause. I can see it on the chat. I can see it on the feedback. People have really enjoyed listening to you. So a very big virtual round of applause from all of us. Thank you to all of our panelists. Again, so sorry to those of you who weren't able to see the presentation. Please do get in touch with us and let us know if it's something that you'd like to go through in person. All of the consultants, Angela and Mortimer, would be delighted to do so. Thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you again to our panelists. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Thank you.